Hi everyone, and welcome to this event called Trauma, Inequality and Healing from COVID-19. My name is Deborah James. I'm a professor of anthropology here at LSE, and it's my great pleasure to be here to sort of introduce this event and to introduce the speakers. Those of you who have only just arrived will perhaps not know that this is part of the LSE Festival. How do we get to a post-COVID world? And it's going on from Monday the 13th to today, basically. It's part of a whole year of activities exploring the practical steps that we could be taking to shape a better world. So we're going to have the film first, and then we're going to have a panel discussion featuring these people here, and I'm going to briefly introduce them, although you might have seen all about them on the internet. But the speakers are as follows. So Suad Duale is a doctoral student of counseling psychology, a psychotherapist, researcher, community leader, consultant, Director of Marsden Wellbeing and Advocate of Mental Health and Women Wellbeing. Nice to have you here. James Rattee is a self-shooting producer-director based in London. He's worked across op docs, I don't even know what those are, and documentaries, as well as short fiction and podcasts. He currently produces explainer films for Bloomberg, as well as working as an independent freelancer. Between 2015 and 2022, he made short documentaries about research at LSE, and was a producer on the award-winning podcast LSE IQ. Nikita Simpson, who's one of my colleagues in the department, is a postdoctoral research officer in the Department of Anthropology at LSE, where she leads the COVID and Care Research Group, and she's got many more qualifications, but I won't rattle them off right now. And Joanna, I seem to have left, oh, there we go. Joanna Lewis is an associate professor in the Department of International History here at the LSE, and her latest book, which is why she's been invited really, is Women of the Somali Diaspora, Refugees, Rebuilding and Resistance, very much on topic for today's topic. So there we go, that's the lineup. And we look forward to the event. So the first thing that's going to happen is the screening of the film. Could I just remind you all, please, to turn off your telephones. The events are recorded, and it's hoped that the podcast will be made available online. Yes, and basically there's a Twitter hashtag as well, so if you want to tweet, please go ahead and do so. It's hashtag LSE Festival. Right, there we go.
Most of the people in this society, they experience war and hardship for every level, economy-wise, education-wise, and so on. But don't get lockdown, it took some flashback for BC for the trauma of the war. And I remember one old lady said to me, I survived 2 to 3 wars and being killed, my husband killed from front of me, but this is the hardest one. And I said, why? She said, I'm getting mad, I'm getting crazy. That's what she used. I'm getting mad because I feel alone. It's nowhere I go. It's just my walls I'm talking to. We are call center connected to each other. Somebody calling me saying, my neighbor, she outside and her husband beating her up. What I do? Somebody saying, I'm breaking down mentally, I don't know what to do. Somebody telling me, and I'm becoming this call center for the breaking down in society.
It was one of the most harrowing and moving interviews that I did during that first period of research. When we came up on the train from Birmingham, we actually didn't know what was in store for us at all. We got a cab from the station and we arrived at the youth centre that Aisha runs, and Suad had organised a range of incredible women to speak with us. And we saw Suad's Birmingham, you know. So Aisha runs the youth centre, and we also met Fatima, who's a volunteer there, who runs one of the coffee mornings, and we also met Faiza, who runs a community radio show.
And that is this woman what makes me really love what I do. To see them and just they're doing amazing. We are connecting in this link and this together, all of us.
So the way that people have dealt with this dislocation and this trauma is basically to call on people like Aisha, who will then call on people like you, who will then call on people like Faiza.
Exactly.
By looking back now, I thought we did so many things. At that moment, we didn't realize the amount of things that we're doing. Bear in mind, I'm a mom of 3, have my own kids, and have my own life, but my kids have to cope for me to go out of the house 6 in the morning and come back 8 o'clock at night. They have to cope with that, and they understand why I'm out. Because if they didn't, I didn't get that support, I won't be able to do what I did and support those people.
Aisha, she just calls me up and says, yeah, Fatima, you okay? Yeah, I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. I've got some food here. Do you want to come and pick it up? I've got a box, loads of food. And the kids were so happy. They're like, oh my God. They remembered us, you know?
The support from the government, the NHS, for our community was very limited, very, very limited. It was up to us how we can help our people to pass the messages that the government was giving out. So that's where I come in, where I invite people who are like doctors, nurses, community leaders, variety of people who has the knowledge to support the community and tell them, look, this is the new rule. You need to put face mask. Oh, and why? So people call in. I have asthma. What should I do? I'm struggling that way. What should I do? Just information for the community mainly.
I am the breadwinner of the family, so I have to go to work and make sure everybody else is okay. So that's been really emotional. That's been hard. I'll be just driving one time and I'll just start crying. Out of nowhere, I'm doing it now again. But yeah, it's been really hard.
I don't think I can rest now. I feel like I have a huge responsibility on my shoulder, and I constantly think of how to be able to release a pain from someone or release a struggle from someone. And for me, I don't think I can rest any time.
You can see that people have been affected by the way they look at you, the way they talk. Well, I'm a volunteer here in the Dream Chasers once a week for the coffee morning for the moms. And the amount of things they talk about. Like this Wednesday, let's just take an example. There's a lady crying, coming to the coffee morning, and she just started crying whilst we were just having a chat about the NHS. And you can see people are having breakdowns.
What austerity did was strip out funding from the local level of government in the UK. And the result were relationships and spaces that had folded or collapsed because they just weren't able to go on in that kind of environment of starvation. We felt this sense of abandonment, that they couldn't rely on the state, that the health service wasn't for them. And so that meant they had to rely on each other. They had to turn inwards. And what was really horrible was that often the mechanisms by which those communities survived, turning inwards on each other, were then further stigmatized as sources of transmission. So we see this kind of dynamic of further isolation and further kind of stigmatization, exacerbating existing forms of systemic racism.
There is a systematic discrimination my community really face every day, in every aspect of life. You know, I call my GP and ask I need a support. The answer at the end of the other call is go online and fill up a form. And they don't even know whether I have the access, if I have access to the internet, no question asked. The housing, Birmingham City Council, is really bad when it comes to our community. My people are suffering. No one is taking our voice to the local government. No one's doing that. We don't have councillors. Our community leaders are trying their best to put our problems out there, but no one's listening to us at all.
Crime is going high, but everywhere is closed. Is it oppressing these kids to be at home and to not do anything and expect them to do well in life? So what can we do differently? That's the question.
I think the government has put a lot of blame on us, so much that we are, at the end of the day, taxpayers, and we haven't got anything back. They haven't done anything for us. They've closed down all the most important places. That's something that I wish that would change, that they give more funding to the people that actually, the organizations that actually are helping people.
I don't have my immediate family here. I have people who are my family. And I remember the ambulance coming and my daughter crying, worrying about me. That is scary. That moment is really scary. I was giving up a lot of time, but they was there for me too. And I was in a hospital. I was not able to talk. But they stay in the line and say, okay, we're telling you stories and you better not die.
I think that it's really important that we move out of this moment and into a moment of reflection and thinking about what this decade of austerity has done to our local social infrastructures and what injection of funds and support can do to a centre like Aisha's centre, to a small psychotherapy business like Suad's for communities. I think there's a moment of hope here, but it takes investment in the communities that have gotten us through.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that film, which was very eye-opening. So there'll be a chance to ask questions in a while, but we're going to kick off by getting a little conversation going here within the panel. So I wondered if I happen to have had the privilege of being part of this group, the LSE Care and COVID group, which suddenly, when the COVID lockdown started, we had all these people who couldn't go out and do their research, so we sort of started doing this online investigation. But I wondered whether Nikita could maybe give us a little bit of the background to how that group came into being, and then how, particularly, you managed to make contact with this amazing group of women.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, Deborah, during the very first moments of the pandemic, in around Easter, late March 2020, there was a real kind of spike in excess mortality that the government really didn't know how to deal with. And at that point, Laura Bear, who leads our group, was in touch with some people within the Cabinet Office, and they realised that the problem was a deeply anthropological problem, a problem about how to deal with bad deaths, or deaths that were occurring in an untimely way, where people couldn't be buried properly, where people couldn't say goodbye to loved ones, in a way that preserved dignity and didn't, cause a kind of social crisis. And so so many people, and almost 20 of colleagues in the department kind of came together to conduct interviews over a very short period of time, about 10 days, which then I wrote up very quickly into a report that went into the UK Cabinet Office and shaped the policy around excess deaths. So encouraging communities to, encouraging local authorities to deal with death in ways that were kind of condoned, or through process of consultation with community leaders and faith leaders and things. So that was a kind of a first moment to start off this conversation with, because it really showed the value of anthropological research that could be fed very quickly into the pandemic response. And so from that very first instance, we formed a kind of ongoing group that fluctuated in size. It was multi-generational. People came in and out at different points, activating their own personal and research contacts across the UK. And we mainly studied the impact of COVID-19 policies on different forms of inequality across the UK. And so one of the people I spoke to in the very first lockdown was Suad, and I knew that there was a lot of excess death. That's such a clinical term. There was a lot of people dying in the Somali community as a result of lots of different reasons. And I wanted to speak to somebody from the Somali community. And so I found Suad's Instagram. Suad runs an incredible Instagram platform called Halo Talk, which is about mental health in the Somali community. And so I DM'd her on Instagram, and we ended up speaking. And we spoke then, and we kind of, I was conducted this research over almost a period of 2 years. And so Suad and I began to speak more regularly, and we actually became very good friends. And yeah, maybe I can let you take it on from here.
Yeah, sure. Let's do it. Give us your side.
Thank you, Risa. I don't know why it's always emotional. Emotional to watch this, and emotional go back to that moment. And it's emotional to keep my English right. My daughter, she was thinking my English is broke. And it was, I think the first speaker, and you talked to me when I was vulnerable, emotional, overbent. I was so everywhere. I was everywhere. Like it was emotional. Really, the whole, I'm still like just watching this moment, like it takes, physically I can feel it in my gut. And the reason was, when we were talking about it, is I'm seeing a lot that I'm getting cold non-stop. My phone is, that is why you call someone to call, because my phone, if you see my phone, it was like 200 calls a day. It was crazy amount. And that day, and I'm dealing with my own grieving too, but I don't know what to do. I'm asking, get help with the community not accessing help. Actually, I write a report to mental health and say, can we develop workshop to these people, or they're not accessing anything. And I just talked to her 1 hour. I felt like he was just, I just put everything on her and say, I'm angry, I don't know what to do, what is it? And I think you met me in my, like I was in dark place. Sometimes when we go to dark place, we go because we're going to personal, but this was not personal, it was mess. It was mess, like, I don't know what to do. I think when we talk about powerless, I was feeling was powerless. Like the good things, my job, I'm therapist. I'm lucky to have supervisor. I know I can have self-awareness, emotional understanding, but it's beyond my emotion. I'm somebody who experienced war, myself, trauma. I didn't know I was tricked too with trauma. I was holding, I was telling you, I don't know what to do. We need to do this. We need to tell this story because people are overwhelmed, and we need to get justice for this story set up, and we don't want this repeating. And we was like, I think the second time we talked was I just come out of the hospital and I was crying. I said to her, no, this is no more. I don't want you to do a boring academy paper where only citizen when you study, when you're doing assignment. I want the people see the picture and hear the story. And we need to do that. And she said, exactly, that's what I was thinking. And I said, okay, how we catch this story? And that is how we start. And I think our friendship, she was there for me too. Just what made this really so special, it was storytelling, and you living in the story itself. and that we're making it. Sometimes we do research because the little ego, I want to be researcher. That is, it can be. But I think this is what's reliving that moment. Yeah, that is how the story was.
Yeah, so it sort of makes me think of my own experience as part of this group as well, because everyone felt very disempowered. In a way, none of us really knew what to do, but somehow getting together on these Zoom calls, kind of like, and finding out, I've been talking to so-and-so, and somebody else has been talking to somebody else, and then you realize that many of these experiences are shared, and that's what kind of made it into a bit more of a group experience, and I suppose that, in a way, gave a lot of people some hope going forward. So maybe we could hear a little bit about how this whole film thing came about and why it was a film that you decided to make.
Yeah, so I was a filmmaker here at LSE working on various research projects, and mid-pandemic I think I got a message from you, Nikita, asking to be involved, and I went along to one of these Zoom conversations, not just with you but with other people you've been working with as well, and it was a really interesting conversation, but as all Zoom calls are, there's a level of detachment there. And it quickly became apparent that Suad was very passionate about making a film, as you just said, to kind of get away from having something written down and perhaps maybe to create a more kind of direct record of experience, in that you get to see not just the people and hear their words, but also kind of experience their surroundings as well. And initially I wasn't sure if that was possible because we were going in and out of lockdowns, and there was initially an idea for maybe for you guys to go and record things on your phone, then send it back to me, then I would edit. But luckily we did have the opportunity to go and actually spend time with you. And we decided to adopt what's called kind of like a participatory filmmaking approach, in which as a filmmaker you give over a lot of the power that you have going in, which is usually the way you want it, because you want to be able to control the narrative. You know, even from a technical perspective, if you want to record an interview, you ideally want to do it in a studio or in a quiet space, and then you have kind of idea of what the story's going to be. But I thought in this case it would not be appropriate. You were very, very keen to set up interviews, to participate and engage in the editing process. And so, as you can see from the film there are times I'm like, oh, the background noise is so noisy, why didn't we go somewhere quieter? But I was thinking, no, it really works to go to like one of the community hubs where we had that delicious meal, several delicious meals, and just to kind of hear people in the background, and you get a real sense of people themselves, but also the communities, and at that stage the kind of communities coming out of lockdown. And so we kind of took it from there, and it wasn't just at the start you were involved and people were involved, they were involved throughout the process as well. So often in the case of participatory filmmaking, the participants are very involved at the beginning, but then editors take it away and they get to construct the story that they think they've heard. And again, we wanted to make sure that you were involved throughout the process, so it very much was your story.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I wondered, could I turn to you, Joanna, and ask you a little bit about this thing that we heard about in the film, which is that sense of sort of not being supported, these women from the Somali community, so sort of invisible, not in view of the authorities, not in view of the NHS. What's the sort of background story there? I mean, I'm assuming this is something you've looked into.
Well, thank you for that, and also congratulations on that. It's very, very moving. And yes, I'm one of those boring academics that writes papers about these sorts of things, so thank you for helping me here. Yes, the book that I wrote, focusing on Somali communities in London, was one that showed the long-term historical background to surviving in London after the Civil War, and the subtitle is, Recovery, Resilience, Fundamentally Refugee Communities. However, I realised that actually the story of this book about resilience would fundamentally make the women that I had interviewed and come to know much more vulnerable during COVID, because the hyper visibility that Somali community has paradoxically means that they are subject to more prejudice, they become more invisible, because what's pinned on them is a range of negative attributes. So very briefly, this correlates to health inequality, or how does that correlate to what we've seen today? So there is a unwillingness often, because as Dr. Farah Beats has said, my co-researcher on the article that we've published on high mortality rates in East End of London, is that there is a conditioning not to talk about your problems, not to bring up your GP. Many don't have a stable or good relationship with their GP practice. Many also were in frontline occupations. So as we heard there, the shocking way in which, and this has been one striking thing for me that's come out of this watching this, is what one would hope from all this empathy about high death rates that had huge amounts of publicity in March, April, May of 2020, would lead to more understanding, more sympathy, more empathy. Actually, that has not been the case at all because of this historic history of prejudice that I have spoken about. So I've got a lot more to say, but I think I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, I mean, obviously feel free to ask each other questions, but what interests me in particular here is that you already had a kind of self-help group basically recognizing that maybe the government or the council weren't really listening. So you'd already established some sort of, well, obviously your practice, but also some kind of network. And all of a sudden the lockdown happened, and then I guess that really put extra pressure on people. But what I remember from the project was the fact that we started recognizing that existing organizations were absolutely crucial. It was like necessary to get in touch with certain community leaders who then were able to speak to those organizations. So maybe you could say a bit more about that, Nikita or Suad.
I think the problem is when we're talking about, like, we go back to social justice, we politicize social justice. People think social justice means if I'm talking to somebody color or black, I tick the box. And that is the problem. That is my problem. And that's where I problem. And I think when you're talking exist system, is the system is not surface always. And education system is not surface to anybody. And simple thing is how, if I'm not able to relate to you, how you can recognize what I'm talking about. And I think what we're talking about is children. I tell you, it's a lot. Oh, I don't know, I'm allowed to share, but I will share and I will tell her. Faiza, she's a strong woman. She was homeless. One of the ladies, she leave her child who autistic and is so smart, and I love her. And she doing the government job to inform what we should do. And that is the job she gives to herself. And actually she, the one connected to the radio, say, can I have 1 hour to just educate the community? And when we talk about systemic racism or social justice, people are scared to talk about it because they think, oh, no, I'm not racist because I have a black friend or I have that. It's not about that. And I think it's in our education system, or when we create a surface, we not include people problem in understand. Because your need in COVID time, it will be different than mine.
Sure. Yeah.
And Nikita's need will be different than mine. But if we all of us, we tick the same box, but the surface is not going to help anybody anyway. But I don't know who they create the surface for, because some people, they don't know what is mental health mean. Like, I remember when I was talking, I used to be, and this call, they created a call where we have 1,000, 2,000 people in the call. I would come and just do mindfulness exercise with them, just to teach them how to regulate their anxiety and so on. And they say, I don't know what is wrong with me. Is this just the God punishing me, or is there something wrong with me, because they don't know what is going on with them. And that is where this problem is. These people, they're not saying, oh, I have trauma now, I've been tricked, I'm getting panic attack. They think panic attack is heart attack. But because they don't know what panic attack is mean, and they never in the language and not exist at all. And now we're talking to call the GP say, I'm sorry, I cannot see you. And this is people have limit language. The GP not able to, and then we have people who are generalizing problems, saying, oh, I'm the leader community, I can talk about all the community. Sometimes we come, my sister would be different than me and my experience. And my brother, how he see my mom, I would see my mom different. But imagine you generalizing people, same color, same ethnic, different race, in one box, and taking them. And that is what was a lot coming out, and you can edit more to what they were saying.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one thing about the kind of ethnic minority engagement strategy in COVID that played out right through the initial waves around excess death and then around vaccine uptake was in itself designed in a stigmatizing way, because it, for example, it framed the problem of vaccine hesitancy as a problem of communications. So, you know, if we just translate the vaccine leaflet into Bengali and we stick them around Tower Hamlets, then that's enough, you know. Or if we just translate, an example is I spoke to somebody in Leicester from the Gujarati community who said to me, why would you translate a leaflet into Gujarati to a community who speak Gujarati but don't know how to write? You know, so you have these kind of, you only scratch the surface with framing the problem as a problem of communications. I think also and maybe Joanna, you have some insight on this historically, but I think one thing that we picked up on a lot was that the model of community engagement kind of followed a colonial model. As Suad said, you identify the community leader, you kind of engage the community through that leader, and that was a model that was replicated in the way in which the government engaged communities around the Ebola epidemic in West Africa. So what we were trying to do as anthropologists was say, as Suad said, there's a range of different experiences in this community. There's inequalities that exist within communities that need to be traced and understood in order to understand why people are getting exposed to COVID, why people are hesitant to take up a vaccine, etc. And I think our kind of more relational perspective allowed us to kind of pick up on that breadth of experience without making it a kind of tick box kind of form of generalization.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, just to say that all the response to COVID was coming in a situation of very traumatic high death rates, as been said. Rhoda Ibrahim, for example, community leader in Brent, was completely overwhelmed in those first couple of weeks. And she was having to help in situations where whole families had been wiped out. And people knew, so many people, you could count, you know, on more than one hand, within those first couple of months, how many individuals they knew, people who had died. And so what's important to remember, however, is that there was a long-term history of issues of health inequality to do with socio-economic status that conditioned that response, that fear of dealing with the NHS, but fundamentally a lack of Somali GPs and nurses. There is one Somali GP, a woman, Dr. Franabid, in the East End. There is one. And that's one of the largest Somali communities in one of the poorest areas that abuts one of the richest areas in London.
Yeah.
And just one thing I added is the language barrier people underestimate. They think, can I speak? I speak broken English. But one of the things that people not understand, language is not about the word you're saying, it's the emotional encoding expression. Somali language is expressed in language. Actually, word depression don't exist in Somali language. Tell me, you go into the assessment and say, oh, you're depressed, you're anxious. What the hell I can tell you about that? This does not exist in my dictionary. And there's the other thing is, when you talking to Aura Nation and you want to translate the language, it's totally different. You have different I've been doing interpreting for nearly 15 years between UK, US. Like I've been behind doors, and sometimes I laugh, like when the people who think they are professional, they come to the room and say, "I'm Doctor so and so and so, and you have this and this and this," and I swear to God, it's just sometimes I laugh and I just let him talk, and know, it's not when you say it don't make sense to them. But I need to get into it and say stop. It's not that. But we don't understand actually how we translate language itself. What is mean is if, like for me, I learn quite all the time. Is when in English I need to say sorry. In some other language we don't say sorry or please. I look rude all the time to people. I'm getting rude. I'm rude to people because I don't use that. In my code language, we don't that. It's just the way I see you, the way I talk to you. You know, I respect you. And now, so many people, they are rude because when they go to GP, say, by the way, I want this and this and this. And they say, can you say please? That is so barrier. It's a so simple thing. You blocked me already. You judge me and I judge you. We don't have no more communication. And that is other layer barrier. We never acknowledge you. We don't know about it. And no one actually explore it and say, actually, this is one of the, it's not mean I don't understand you. Oh, what does that mean?
So I would sort of ask James here because, so you came in as a sort of outsider to make this film. I mean, did it strike you that this whole thing of translation was something important? Because obviously you were making the film in English, I guess, most of the time. But I also wondered, okay, you're the only man on this panel. I didn't notice any men in this film. I just wondered, where are the Somali men in this whole story? Is it that these Somali women have been forced to sort of become this very self-reliant group because the men are doing something else? I just wondered if you had any insights into that.
Yeah, it is kind of noticeable when you're there. Obviously, so I'd be able to speak more to this than I can, but it's very visible that it seems that the women are the linchpins of the community, and they're the ones with the networks. And then when we were down there filming, a lot of the women were active and working. There were men there, but they seem to be doing more socialising in the cafes and stuff. That was just my impression. And then, in terms of translation, on a wider, in terms of a broader kind of concept of translation, what really struck me, being there for a couple of days, was, coming from my London life, lockdown rules felt very kind of like black and white, and you're either abiding by them or you're not, and there was kind of like a social stigma to not. And then when you go to a place like the Somali community in Birmingham, you realise actually, if you don't follow the rules, it's not because you're a bad person. You're having to rely on networks. You're having to kind of share food, and if someone's really struggling, you have to come into contact with other people. And then by coming into contact with other people, you're being stigmatized. And there's a kind of like a vicious circle that's going on there.
Yeah, that's right.
So that really struck me. In terms of the language itself, like, people were so expressive, and I hope this comes through the film as well. Like, even when people were struggling to find the right words, I feel like the emotion was so strong. It was so soon after, it was like between lockdowns, I think, that kind of communicative force was kind of there, apparent, and just kind of walking around and spending time with people.
Yeah, great. Joanna, and if you have anything else to add, please do, or do you want to ask them anything about it?
Well, I'd love to ask Suad, what do you think about the racially informed aspect to this, that the legacy of racism with regard to trauma? Some doctors are arguing that the legacy of racism has a health impact, and I wondered what you felt about that aspect.
Oh, that's a big question. There is two elements. This is trauma. Who give the name of trauma? Where I'm coming from. If you talk about trauma in West cultural review, it's totally different. When you're talking about trauma in collective culture, it's totally different interpretation. But in psychology, the trauma we're talking about is individualized. One person, how your nervous system, how your core belief, how all this related to you. But when it's group and collective culture, trauma, people don't know I am, can I feel, can I be myself? It's collective. That is how trauma is. And the other thing is, we're talking about generation who don't know mental health. Like, to now, we have limitation in Somali language, about mental health diagnosis. Literally, it's not exist yet. that much of this, so far I'm aware of it. The trauma in psychology is totally different when you go back and different. But for me, for somebody who studied psychology and been training quite a lot, sometimes I used to not know, actually, did I have trauma? And actually, the first time I acknowledged I had trauma is when I could not close my eyes, some of the exercise I was doing in arts therapy. And I said, I'm not able to close my eyes. And I was thinking something wrong with me. And then I got flashback, something happened to me in the past. And then I said, oh shit, that day I survived, I've been killed. And I was only 6 years old. And I called my auntie, I said, did accident something happen like that? She said, yeah, that day you was nearly going to die. But I didn't know. I didn't know why I'm not able to close my eyes at some point, and so why I could not do that exercise. But I mean, for me, knowing and studying psychology, I didn't know what I was feeling, what it called. I imagine people who never know what does that mean, and so. But the language coding emotion is totally different. Then we come in the element of racism. This is generation trauma and racism. This is stress. You feel it. One of the things broke, you would not know, you think it stopped some generation, no racism no more. I remember a couple of years ago, my daughter, she was 15, and she said, I want to become a lawyer. And then she said, no, I cannot be a lawyer. I said, why? She said, I'm black. I said, what does that mean? She said to me, Mom, I'm black. I will not get opportunity to train. And that shocked me. She born here in Europe, and she should have more opportunity. I never tell her you are different, but that is a generation who born here and they think they can access anything, but they don't have that. They see around them, they not able to access it. But that is when we talk about racism, it's not about the color. It's about the quality. It's about the justice. It's not me telling you are racist to me. It's more about I'm able to express how I feel, whatever I feel, and wherever I can, without you putting the word in my mouth and what you should and what I shouldn't. Now we train in therapy and trauma, all this. I see all my training. I can't relate to. I never attended one psychology lecture where I said, "Oh my God, I can't relate to this." And I'm studying psychology all my life. But that is the problem. It's related to that connection, who you can't relate to. And people who, if you train for something, and you think is, oh, I can work multi culture or multicultural, but you've been trained, the whole background is same, the whole education system is same. But we introduce the same thing again and again. But we're not getting new brain to change how we think.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, we drink the same water again. And I think we're just seeing colors. And I don't want to see color. I don't mind to you black or white or wherever you are, or Asian, anything. It's not matter that. It's just what here, what quality we are, and we're customer to our self-present system. To the system put all of us together, and we're not seeing no more anything.
Okay, great. So, do you want to add anything? So I was thinking I'd go to the audience. We can come back at the end because we are talking about like healing from COVID, so we need to go onto that a little bit. So yeah, are there any questions from the? Yeah, there's one over there.
And I'm really touched about this whole movie because I live in Birmingham too. And after the COVID, I did find there's an increasing number of homeless on the street. And every corner of the traffic light, you will see a homeless. And also there's an increased number of crime rates in Birmingham as well. And I got friends whose sites has been invaded and like they were actually growing drugs in the sites. And I moved from London years ago to Birmingham, and I did realize there's epidemic bubble from people's recognition, both cognitively and also interactionally between those social groups. Me, as a minority group, I learned the word racist. I learned the word racist since I came to UK. I never ever experienced racist in my own country. This is what I learned in UK. But it's a good thing. I experience probably the social class I will not experience in my own country. But I've been lucky because I'm a IC alumni. I got economic ability to success in this world. But I mean, to me, this problem is not just after COVID. It's always there. We are saying that we don't have racial segregation. Actually, we are. We, minority group, we live in a similar location. We have a worse education system, which even like I moved from London to Birmingham, the ability to access free milk powder is different. I ask a GP here, it's fine.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up because we've got quite a few other questions.
I'm really sorry. But I was wondering how you think we as people share similar feelings can break this chain and how we can make this world together, not only narratively.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to take a few questions and then I'm going to give you guys to pick what you want. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you very much. I once worked in an international donors law enforcement support program in Puntland in northern Somalia. I was utterly ashamed at the contempt and selfishness and mismanagement of that program by the international donors, not, I must stress, by anybody from Somalia. Absolute disgrace. Too often that is the case. My question is, how are you finding that as the pandemic recedes, hopefully, there's difficulty in keeping up momentum about your message? Is it the old story that once the really acute phase of the crisis is over, people lose interest? How are you keeping the momentum up, and are people still listening to you? Thank you.
Thanks. And I think there was another question. Yeah, that gentleman over there. I think the microphone's coming to you now.
Yeah, I'm from Hackney, and I'm a volunteer with Health Watch Hackney, and we face a lot of similar anxieties and fears around the access to healthcare and social care as well. Do you have organisations in Birmingham which enable the Somali community in Birmingham to liaise with non-state organisations in bridging the gap between the communities and the National Health Service? Because in my own experience, we usually have meetings with the CCGs, and that helps as well, because what I notice is that a lot of elderly people and people with long-term conditions also, it takes a long time to arrange and organize. Have you had any of those experiences in trying to bring the community together?
Great, thank you. I think we'll take those three to start off with. So over to you guys.
Yeah.
Do you want to answer anything? Do you want to answer?
I'll start off, and I think actually we can weave the three questions together in a really interesting way. So as part of the general COVID in Care kind of project, we basically tried to track these relationships, as you say, between CCGs, NHS, grassroots organisations and local government. And we've actually colleagues of mine have done a study in Hackney, and I think they may have spoke to colleagues at Health Watch, and also Hackney's a really interesting case study because there are really deep historical links between those organisations which aren't present in other parallel boroughs like Ealing, where we did work as well, or Tower Hamlets. So I suppose our findings, and here I bring in this gentleman's question as well, our findings were that there was a kind of really interesting opening where all of these organisations came together in innovative and new ways around a common goal, exactly like this. Often because of suspended procurement mechanisms, because of increased government funding that was unrestricted, and also with a need, like a kind of burning need to engage grassroots organizations who had previously been excluded from conversations where they were kind of led by the usual, what people call the usual suspects at that local authority level. Now, whether those kind of consortia models are sustainable or not is an interesting question that we've tried to track. I don't know, Joanna, you might have some insights on that from your work in East London, but certainly I think that the environment of austerity starvation means that those relationships are very fragile. And I know Deborah's done previous work on this before the pandemic, which really helped us to understand what a big thing it was for those organizations to be able to come together in the first place. I suppose what I'm finding really interesting now in trying to answer that question is to start to actually ask people who are in the greatest need whether those services are linking up for them. So Suad and I went back to Dream Chasers Youth Centre about 3 weeks ago, and we screened the film back to a group of 17 women from the Somali community, including Faiza, including Aisha, including Fatima, yeah. And it was amazing because they had very, very specific demands and concerns, and they were really angry because, you know, certain things that they were promised in that moment of the pandemic were not being delivered on, for example, housing and other things. So yeah, I don't know, I hand it over to you guys, but I do definitely think that that window has closed in many ways.
Right. And I think this is because of what we did, we are here today, but we're able to hear this. I think it's not only COVID and over, I think this story continue. And we go back again to them, we screen them from, and we hear the feedback again, and we listen to them. Yes, there is, I attend so much meeting, it's beyond me. I'm not a fan of meetings, but every time come to this meeting, we need to do this. I did with how to watch research. I give report recommendation about how they improve surface, and I've been attending the meetings. But now the other problem they're facing is black women. They're not able to get more breast cancer because they're not attending the smear test, and so it's just other big than issue for this. And I see different community because I'm not only speak Somali, I speak 4 language. I grew up in, I see a lot of other different community. The isolation, I think, community come together and people are, and the problem is we don't have that much data too. When you're talking to the government and people who make things, they want data, they want to receive.
Yeah.
When you are emotional and you're not reading, writing, and know people and stuff, you don't have receipt. Well, no one's going to hear you. Sure. And I think that is the other problem with ethnic minority problem.
Yeah, but that's why the film is so great, because it's it's something you can play back to people and they can respond, and it almost carries the momentum forward, I think. So well done, you guys. Joanna, do you want to say anything? Because I'm going to ask the final question in a few minutes, but yeah, anything on those comments?
Just very quickly, in the case of our more modest research, you know, Dr. Farabid and I, we found it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The fundamental problem is lack of data. And it's really important that Somalis who are either experts or experts in experience are enabled, supported to generate that community-sensitive data. Farah and myself, from our research, we did a 1-day training workshop on cultural sensitivity about the Somali community, 2 care providers for the North East London Authority, including Tower Hamlets. And what came out of that was how important it is, because of the colonial legacy and the legacy of indirect rule, is to get, because we were in a state of minority communities, is to get all minority communities to also be understanding the various histories that are unique, the various cultures that are unique, but also their shared experience of racism and inequality. So there are positives. But yes, it is a big hurdle that we all have to, I think, collectively try and get over.
Right. Anything you want to add at all?
Just from a filmmaking perspective, in terms of breaking this narrative, I feel that too often, and I'm thinking especially of news, a story will happen, people will descend, a crew will descend on a particular place, they'll interview somebody, and they'll inadvertently kind of recycle narratives of victimhood, of othering, where from the outside we're coming in. And I think there's a real important job to be done in finding new ways of reporting and new visual languages to kind of help express people's points of view, to embody their experiences. And I think hopefully that might help break this chain.
That's great, yeah. So we've got literally about 2 more minutes left, and I just thought I would ask one final question, or it might just be a statement, I suppose. Because what struck me about the film was, first of all, you got the austerity, then you got the lockdown, so everything becomes very, very constrained, and as you say, it kind of expressed itself in mental health, although it's obviously just deprivation in a whole lot of different ways. And this is something I know you've worked on a lot, Nikita. But I wondered, how likely is it that these forms of help, which is effectively some sort of self-help that has been generated, will sort of outlast the lockdown, outlast the pandemic? And that's kind of what these other questions have been as well. So it's all about, you know, are we going to heal? Are we going to carry on healing? Or is it just that when the pandemic was on, everyone came together, and once it moves on, is it sort of like going to be over? I'm hoping not, but I mean, I don't know if you have any more thoughts about that at all.
Maybe a positive story from me. When we went to screen the film a couple of weeks ago, Pfizer has secured a grant to basically set up her own studio for the community radio with all her own equipment on the like adjacent to the Dream Chasers Youth Centre, and she interviewed us and you know, to get the film out to the community. So, you know, I mean, that's something that she started and really kind of locked in during the pandemic and kind of responded to a particular need that she's now found a way of continuing to sustain. But you know, that's based on government grants and being able to access funding and things like that. So, I mean, that's I suppose if we go back to an austerity state, then again these things fold.
Yeah, and the other thing is, Asha too, she tried to get funding, but she had 500 kids. 500 kids in football in different teams, and she's saving their children from the stress and for crime. But that is beautiful for this pain too. Is people do the best they can, and there are women who save in their community, and I love them. And actually, I'm proud to be part of that. And I think it's, for me, it's yes, I'm kind of like qualified to do things. I think what I love about it is I like my name because they call me, hey, Suad, I wanted this and this. But I love that sense. We are, without anything, they are just human who connect in a deep level to help each other without any structure, system, or that. And that is beauty. I think there is hope for humankind, I think.
Great, well that's a wonderful note on which to end. So thank you very much to our panelists, and thanks to all for coming.